So today, as we think about the wise men, as we think about Epiphany, as we think about this day, we start by remembering that as long as the human race has been around, we have been fascinated with the stars. We have been in our stargazers. It is amazing to look up into the sky. Somebody this morning said he looked to the east. He looked to the east. He looked to the east, and he saw the sun rising, and he saw two of the planets very low on the horizon. Fascinating. If you've ever been in a place where there has been little or no light pollution, it might feel like the sky is actually coming closer than it usually does. We were in the southern hemisphere in July of 2002 in the country of Zambia. Out in the bush, there was absolutely no light, and it was amazing and overwhelming to look at the stars. When we see all of them, these billions and billions of stars, we can, in fact, often do feel insignificant. And we wonder how it is that in the grandeur of the cosmos, how can we matter? How can we be seen? How can the God who creates all of it be near enough to us to notice us? And yet in Psalm 8, the psalmist says that God does notice. Who are we, God, that you would notice us? And yet God does in the scope of all of this. If you look into the sky, all of these stars, and you try to imagine which one is most important, you get lost. And when I look at this picture, at least, again, I feel awfully small, awfully far from the God who creates all of this, wondering how it is in the midst of all of this that God can know us. There are about 10 billion galaxies in the observable universe. 10 billion. The number of stars in the galaxy varies, but assuming an average of 100 billion stars per galaxy, it means there are about, and you see the number, 1 billion trillion stars in the observable universe. Whew, that's a lot of stars. Where do we fit in this whole thing? Why are we fascinated with them? Why do we look up, and how is it that we see ourselves in all of this? We're fascinated with stars. Star Trek, Star Wars, shooting stars, rising stars. We love to put people who are rising in their game, whether it is in academia or professional sports or any kind of sport or music or theater, drama. We love to put people we think of as rising stars on the pedestal. Why? So that we can pull them down, wipe them out. But at the time, we are enamored with rising stars and how quickly all of that changes. Dancing with the stars. We are all about the stars. If you dance with the stars, you have made it. A Star is Born, whether it's Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson in the original, or Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga in the remake, A Star is Born. We are fascinated with stars. If you've ever been in love before, and you look in the eyes of the beloved, and you see starry eyes, and she or he sees starry eyes, you are starstruck. Doesn't last very long. Never comes back. Forever and ever and ever. Amen. But for the time being, when we are star-struck, there is no one else in the world. There is no other star. We are star-struck. I love Tom Hanks. He's a star in my book. I love Denzel Washington. He is a star in my book, and I'm sure all of us have some kind of a star that we admire, some kind of a star that we don't even really know, but on the silver screen has touched our lives. We are enamored with stars. The story of Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis is an interesting story for a lot of reasons. Some of you know it. God comes to Abraham and to Sarah and says that God is going to make a great nation of them. God invites Abraham and Sarah to go to a place that they've never seen before, they have never known before, and God invites them to go in trust, to go in faith. At one point in the story, God brings Abraham out into the night sky and says, "Look toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to count them." Then God said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Imagine that. Abraham looking into the night sky and hearing God speak to him and say, "As many stars as are there shall be your descendants." We are descendants of Abraham. We are those stars. If you read the story of Sarah and Abraham's family in the book of Genesis, it is a screwed up family, which is why it's a book that we can relate so well to in our lives, at least in my family. And so imagine that you are Abraham. Imagine you see the grandeur of all of this. You might want to say to God, "Really? My descendants, Sarah's descendants, are going to be that many? That is overwhelming. You are the God of the cosmos. How is it that you can be a part of our narrative?" Which brings us to the story from Matthew. It's an interesting story. We hear that there are 3 wise men who come from the east. More on that later. There may have been 10. There may have been 17. Somebody this morning said there were 23. So we don't really know how many there were, but Matthew tells us they came from the east. They weren't kings, even though we sang at all 3 services, "We 3 kings." The 2 kings in Matthew are Jesus and Herod. And there's going to be a horrible conflict that emerges between the 2 of them. But they come and they follow a star. Does anybody have an idea why Matthew bothers to tell us that they are from the east? Any guesses? Okay, I'll tell you. I think, and I haven't read this anywhere, so I'm making it up, but I think there's something to it. Go back to the book of Genesis, and Adam and Eve, what happens to Adam and Eve? They are tossed from the place of paradise, and in what direction are they tossed? East of Eden. John Steinbeck, east of Eden. And so east of Eden becomes symbolic for the wilderness, for being out there. Matthew's trying to tell us that the message of Jesus goes to the east and the north and the south and the west, but the east is a place where there are outsiders, where there are people called the Gentiles. And the Magi are Gentiles, so they are outsiders, and here they come. I'll skip that one. You have your intern and your 2 pastors. We were stand-ins that night. The actors were sick at home, and so they asked us to be there, and it was atrocious. So, wise men have come to worship him. So I want to tell you a story. Becky and I got married in 1985, and Becky's mother made this incredible nativity scene for us, hand-painted every figure, and her grandfather made the stable. So I was 25 at the time and out on internship, and I'm going to set my wife straight about the wise men. First mistake. So we set it up, and she went away, and she came back, and she said, "Where are the wise men?" And well, they're over here. They don't come for a couple years until Jesus is about 2 years old. I don't care. So 30 seconds later, they were back. So much for theological accuracy. It was a good thing to do, though, to be a wise man for once. Married in August, this was December. Okay, good enough. So, but the wise men, they do come a couple of years later. It's interesting that Jesus is in a house, which means that he is a child who's beginning to grow, which is actually pretty cool. We get a sense of Jesus as a child, and what they do, they come and they bend the knee and they worship the one who is the Messiah. They give the very best they have. Worship is at the core of who we are as the people of God. All of the good works that we do are wonderful. All of the service that we do is wonderful. The wise men show us, though, that bending the knee and bringing our gifts and being open to what God in Jesus has to say to us matters. It is core, which is why Matthew tells the story early in the gospel. East of Eden. You got to know that the Magi, they weren't followers of the God of Israel. They might have been Zoroastrians. More on that later, but they were outsiders. They were not of the people of Israel. And it's significant that Matthew points to these 3 or 17 or 23 as a way of saying that the gospel goes to all the nations. End of Matthew chapter 28. Go into all the world, to the Goyim, to the Gentiles. Outsiders become insiders. So you might know people that you would like to keep on the margin. But the Messiah, the light who comes, the one who manifests, the creator of all of it, says, no more outsiders. We are all brought in, even these wise men from the east, even the Gentiles. It's a big, big deal. The gospel is for the whole world and all of creation. So we suffer from light pollution, most places that we live, whether it's in the city or wherever. And I have a question for you this morning. The question is this. As you take stock of your own life, as you think about living from one day to the next, what are some of the forms of light pollution that make it difficult to see clearly? What are maybe some of the anger that you're carrying over from the holiday season? How is that kind of light pollution making it difficult to see the light? Maybe it is a struggle as a parent or a spouse or with a coworker. Maybe you're thinking it's tough to be a kid. What is some of the light pollution that we live with that makes it difficult to see clearly? Think about that. What might that be? Artificial light is absolutely essential for us to see. But what I want to suggest this morning is that it is artificial. It is not true light. It is not full light. And so we have light pollution and we have artificial light. Sometimes that is the best we can do, but there is more. How many of you have at any time in your life been afraid of the dark? How many of you at any point in your life have been afraid of the dark by show of hands? Those of you who haven't put up your hands are lying. I'm kidding. Mostly. So when I was a kid, there was a time where I was dreadfully afraid of the dark. And it was because my parents, who were working outside the home, both of them, allowed us full reign of the TV in the afternoon. And there was a soap opera that we watched that made me dreadfully afraid of the dark. It was called Dark Shadows. How many of you have seen Dark Shadows? Oh, that's more. Okay. There was a character, Barnabas Collins. That dude was scary. That dude was a trippy cat. That dude was a regular guy by day and a vampire by night. Daylight, afternoon, Mom would send me down to the basement to get something. So our basement steps had gaps between them. And so I would run down as fast as I could, fearful that if I didn't, Barnabas Collins would grab me and keep me in the darkness forever. He had this big black cape, and the show was largely in black and white. Jonathan Freed was the guy who played him. That guy was scary, and so I was afraid of the dark. Even this morning, confession. Come in a little before 6 o'clock, no lights in the building. Go into the kitchen to make some coffee, no lights, and in fact, there was a little pantry. The doors open, and it was really dark in there. Hustle past, turn on the light, made the coffee, got the heck out of there, went back to my office. So we are afraid, most of us, many of us, maybe all of us, of the dark. And I think the reason we are is because when we are in the darkness, we wonder how we're going to get through it. Who is with us? Does anybody notice us in the darkness? And so we are deathly afraid at times of the darkness. The good news that we come to celebrate today is that the true light that comes into the world enlightens the whole world, enlightens all of us, and this light of the world comes into the darkness with us, takes us, if you will, arm by arm, and leads us through it to the light. The true light, not light pollution, not artificial light, but the true light that comes into the world enlightens all of it. And as John reminds us, the light has come into the darkness, and the darkness has not, does not, and will not overcome it. That's the promise of Jesus. That's the promise of Christmas. That no matter where we are, the light will be with us, and the darkness will never, ever snuff it out. You know the story of Jesus? Again, Herod and Jesus are the two kings, not these three guys. And there will be this conflict, and Herod holds all the cards. Herod has all the power, and so Herod will put Jesus to death on the cross. The reason the cross matters to me in a deeply personal way is because it reminds us that Jesus knows the very best and the worst of what we experience. He doesn't almost die. He doesn't sort of die. He doesn't kind of die. On the cross, Jesus dies. Dead as a doornail, as dark as one can imagine. It must have been a fearful time for lots of people who had followed him. But on the third day, the tomb is empty. The light shines. The darkness will never overcome it. That's the end of the story. That's the good news. Jesus Christ crucified and risen. Jesus Christ, life snuffed out, light brought out of the empty tomb, and that light is with us today. Madeleine L'Engle was a poet, writer. She lived until 2007. She wrote, I think, about 60 books and a whole lot of poems. And she says this to us as people of the light. We do not draw people to Christ by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are. Wow. A lot of people that I wish had that attitude today in our leadership, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all of their hearts to know the source of it. They want with all of their hearts to know the source of it. So too often in the church, where we have a bunch of insiders, we think that people ought to come having it figured out the way we have figured it out. That people ought to come with things well put together. The wise men didn't know a darn thing, really, but they were seeking. And people seek all the time. Imagine if we approach people and suggest to them that there is only one right way to see all of this. We snuff out, really, the light that they carry. And so the invitation to us is to welcome each other as we are, is to say to people in Jesus, in the light of the world, outsiders have become insiders, all of us. And so inside out, we are in it together. Try this week to approach somebody like the Magi. Try to listen to their story, not to make them right, not to show them how smart you are about the Magi not needing to be a part of the nativity scene, but listen. Listen and reflect the light of Christ, and they just might say, wonder what the source of that is. There's your opening. The source is Jesus. God makes all of these stars and yet knows you, loves you, wants to be in a relationship with you. That's what we celebrate today, and the wise men help us understand that. Good guys, after all.